It's 9:10. The board meeting is officially in session. The cast of characters, the regular group, here in studio, editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Good morning, Tony Messenger.
Good morning.
Also with us, former chief of staff to Governor Holden, all-around gadfly and local attorney, Jane Duker. Jane, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen.
We've noticed your bedazzled sweater. Was that you? Did you do that, or did you purchase that sweater like that?
J. Crew did it, and I'm feeling festive, just like you.
It's a lovely bedazzled sweater you have on.
Thank
It's blinding me.
For those of you,
Don't turn.
You can watch at stltoday.com. Also with us is a very busy man, headed back down to Jefferson City after the show. We thank him publicly for making time out for us. Currently the House Majority Leader and Speaker in waiting, the very slimmed down John Diehl. John, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, McGraw.
Let's start with Boeing. You have been in these negotiations. What are your thoughts, and what can you tell us publicly about what's going on?
Sure, I think it's a very exciting opportunity for the state. Boeing is one of the largest employers in this region and the state, and when you look at this, it's not just Boeing. It's also the very extensive supplier network that they have. So, if you think about each plane has hundreds and thousands of different parts that are typically made by other companies other than Boeing, and then Boeing ends up assembling a lot of the parts together. So the current Boeing operation has about 600 different suppliers that are located here in the state, all across the state. So over the past 2 or 3 weeks, an opportunity to get the 777X has come on the radar screen. Boeing had received about over $100 billion worth of sales on these at the last air show in Dubai. They're on a production schedule to start in 2018 with plane delivery in 2020. They ran into significant labor issues up in Washington State and has put that out for an RFP. So that the governor has been in pretty close contact with Boeing, as has the economic development entities in St. Louis, who I will add are working together very, very well in cooperation on this. And they're putting together a package that they believe can allow us to compete for this project, which if we get it all, and there's 3 components to it, but it's anywhere from 2,000 to 8,000 jobs. And for every direct job at Boeing, there are going to be about 3 supplier jobs that follow. So it's pretty exciting, and I think we're going to take a hard look at it in the House.
Do you suspect it's passing in the House? Are you optimistic? Are you hopeful that this now goes to the House, that it passes?
Well, it passed in the Senate
right
earlier in the week. I suspect it will pass in the House, but I'm not going to make predictions today. We still have to talk to our members about it. We're a day or two behind the process is where the Senate was. So, later on this afternoon, the governor's people are coming back and talking to our caucus members who want to know more information about it, what it is, what the opportunity is, and what the package is.
It's great. And from the outside looking in, it looks like Republicans are talking to Democrats, House members are talking to Senate members, Senate and House members are talking to the governor, and Labor is actually talking and giving concessions. From the outside looking in, it sounds like you guys are working together.
Yeah, actually, I've really been amazed. When you look at some of the issues we had up in Jefferson City just a couple of years ago on a special session, and look how things have turned. I mean, I think the story of the General Assembly is much different than it was 2 or 3 years ago. House and Senate leadership talk regularly. If we have disagreements, you don't see us taking out against each other publicly. We sit down and we work through those disagreements in advance and try to put together a game plan to be successful. And I think this is going to be one of the first major steps that you see toward having a more functioning General Assembly.
All right, I open it up to the panel. If this goes through, what are the chances of Boeing actually following through and giving St. Louis and Missouri some of this? Tony Messenger.
The analysts say very little chance of it actually ending up in Missouri. The people that I've talked to, that I'm sure John's talked to, actually are positive about at least possibly getting the wing in St. Louis. And if that happens, that's at least 2,000 jobs. And I don't think anybody disagrees that it's an exciting opportunity. We'd love to have Boeing expand in Missouri. It would be great for St. Louis. It would be great for Missouri, and especially if the entire thing happened and we got 8,000 new jobs and actually new jobs, not just switched over from the defense plant. then it could be a tremendous economic opportunity for the state. My problem with this process is that as we're praising bipartisanship and all of this magic unity happens in Missouri only when you're talking about giving hundreds of millions of dollars to a corporation that doesn't really need it. That's how you get unity in Missouri. There's no special session unity over accepting $8 billion from the federal government to produce about the same amount of jobs in the healthcare industry and provide poor people health care. There's no unity when it comes to having a special session to provide funding for kids in Normandy and Riverview Gardens who aren't getting an education. There's unity because we're talking about giving hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars to a corporation to increase the income inequality problems that we have, that the Pope's been talking about, that the President talked about eloquently yesterday, and that's my problem with what's going on. It's horrible public policy, and I don't believe the end justifies.
Do we have
the
any other option, though? I mean, would we rather just lay down our arms and say we're not going to bid for stuff like this?
No, we do have other options. What the unions are doing in terms of negotiating is great. What the state is doing in terms of the community colleges coming together and say, hey, we can train these workers, that's great. The city's saying, hey, we've got this land at the airport and we can work with you on that, Boeing. All of these things are great. But this idea that because Boeing says jump, we have to say how high, forget what caps we have on our programs. Let's just come up with as many millions of dollars as they're asking for, as many that we can throw at them and hope that that works. It's not only bad public policy if it succeeds, because it tells every other business that's looking to locate in Missouri, boy, they got a pot of gold. We know how to get some money there. It's also bad because if it doesn't work, the potential repercussions to public policy are really negative. Mr. Deal over here, who's praising the unions and all of their cooperation, which is great.
I don't think I praised it.
As soon as if this deal fails, the current Speaker of the House has a right to work bill out there that'll be horrible to the unions, and he'll be pushing that thing to high heaven because, oh my gosh, we know why they didn't come. They didn't come because of the right to work state. So there are some repercussions to this kumbaya singing that's going on in Jefferson City right now that I think anytime you try to rush something through, there's never been a bill of this magnitude pushed through so quickly in the Missouri legislature, probably in its history, and I think that's rife with potential mistakes.
Jane Duker.
Yeah, I mean, while I do agree with some of what Tony said with regard to, we pick very interestingly in Missouri what we all get behind. And, and initially that really did bother me. I'm like, where's the special session on Medicaid? Where's it on education, other issues? But then, because the legislature's not doing everything I want, doesn't, I'm not sure that it's fair to say that we ought not do Boeing because I'm unhappy with the other things they're not doing. And so that's sort of where I came down on it was, look, Missouri has to be able to react, and I don't know if we're going to get it. And regardless of whether we get it or not, I think that it is important that Missouri is able to step up to the plate when an opportunity arises. And we are showing that we are able to do that. Now, whether this is the perfect way to do it, the perfect opportunity, it's tough to say. But if you're not in the game, then you're not in the game. And I feel like, one, we have to be able to react quickly and do these things to get opportunities. And if not this, then what is the alternative? If this is what the game is, unfortunately, it's not a great game, but it is the game.
I know John Deal's jumping at the bit. I want to ask Tony a question. Tony, the argument that Nixon vetoed across-the-board tax cuts for all businesses that were here, for all people that were here, was shot down. The Republicans are saying, why give a special tax break to Boeing when we all deserve a special tax break?
Well, the Republicans are saying that while they're passing the bill, so it's a little bit empty from that. This is part of the interesting thing about this. When this vote is done, everybody, Democrat and or Republican, who votes for it, will have contradicted themselves in another position. I believe the governor is contradicting his very smart arguments he made against 253 because he said you're either cutting money for corporate taxes or you're giving it to education. And now he's saying this isn't either or. This one's different because it's manufacturing jobs. I don't think it's entirely different. I think some of those Republican critics are right that the governor has put himself in a hypocritical position. By the same token, the Republicans who either have pushed for right to work and are now pushing to try to get these great union jobs, or who have said, we can't afford the Medicaid expansion that, by the way, is paid for with the federal government. The federal government's giving us $8 billion to create jobs and to put people on health care. Some Republicans have said, we can't afford that. That's money that's coming to us, and yet now we're going to spend $150 million a year easily over 20 years into the couple of $1 billion in order to bring these jobs and entice these jobs. So you can't say we can't afford Medicaid expansion if you vote for this thing. So there's some really interesting contradictions. My hope is that there's some intellectual honesty in that Capitol after this vote, because I agree it's going to pass. And whether or not we get the jobs, if once that vote is done, I hope that vote is held over everybody's head in the next session that starts in January, so that we then get Medicaid expansion, so that we then get full funding for education, the things that everybody keeps saying that they believe in, and there is some intellectual consistency with this vote based on the things that will happen in the next session.
John Deal, last word.
Boy,
Go
one
ahead.
word, there's a lot. I mean, a lot of this discourse, I think, is what's wrong with discourse in public policy, is that consensus gets built around things that you can build consensus around. And to bring in Medicaid expansion or whatever as a reason not to do this, I think is not a very strong argument. Let's get back to what the facts are. Okay, much of the incentives which are being provided to Boeing, in this case, if successful, goes back into education. It goes back into job retraining, which is done by our community colleges. It goes to programs at UMSL and Rolla and even Washington University that deal with engineering. I mean, Boeing is a big part of the fabric of our educational system at Rolla and at UMSL. So a lot of that money goes back. Number one. Number two, we have zero chance to land this if we don't put an incentive package on the table. So the withholding that's generated by Boeing never gets generated if we don't put something on the table on this. Is it rife with mistakes? I don't think so. I've actually looked at it pretty closely. What the governor has proposed is within the constrictions of existing programs where the rules have been tested and we know how they work. All we're dealing with is whether we spend X amount of money of that or this amount of money of that. There's no new programs. There's no new methods on doing this. And I liken this to whether or not we're going to get this done. Is Mizzou going to win the national championship? Well,
No, but they got a chance.
They have a chance, right? So maybe it's a 10 or 15% chance. So, okay, it's only 10 or 15% chance, so let's not even bother playing the game this weekend.
Right.
Because we're not guaranteed we're going to win. Do we want to fight for these jobs? Do we want to fight for this opportunity? Or do we just want to say, we're not guaranteed it, so let's quit and go home?
That's John Deal, Tony Messenger, Jane Duker. Quickly, what are your thoughts?
Well, no, I think the fact that these programs are tied to actual creation of jobs, so the jobs have to come before they get the money. And we look at, like, you look at Northside, that's probably a bigger question mark than this would be. So it's not like we haven't done this kind of stuff before. So go.
All right, that's Jane Duker, Tony Messenger, John Deal. Back with more of the board meeting on the Big 550 KTRS. Go to KTRS.com with House Majority Leader John Deal, Jane Duker, and editorial page editor Tony Messenger. We will be giving away Cardinal tickets coming up a little bit later on this hour. So stick around for that. We'll start with you, Tony Messenger. Go ahead.
An interesting thing happened this week in Jefferson City, unrelated to Boeing, although sort of like the planes Boeing flies, this could involve flying high in the air. A gentleman from Columbia named Dan Beats has filed a constitutional amendment, a petition to try to get signatures on an amendment in Missouri to basically legalize pot, as has happened in Colorado and Washington in the last election. And I find this topic fascinating. I've been writing about it a little bit. One of the things that I find fascinating about it is the bipartisanship. You talk about bipartisanship with Boeing. The whole legalizing pot movement is as much a libertarian, almost Tea Party freedom sort of movement these days as it is a bunch of liberal hippies in cities like Columbia and Boulder. And I think this time, in terms of how much the country has changed on that issue, this isn't just another guy, trying to get a headline for a couple of days. I think there is a good chance that they will really try to get that thing on the ballot. And I think if you get that thing on the ballot in Missouri, it passes.
There is a alderman in St. Peter's who is suffering from cancer and couldn't eat, couldn't swallow, and was afraid, his doctors were afraid that he might actually starve to death, started smoking marijuana so that he could actually eat, and was given a summons from the St. Peter's authorities for smoking medical marijuana. You want to talk about getting between a doctor and a patient.
Yeah.
Right? You want to talk about government telling you what you can and can't do with your doctor. The fact that in this state and in this country, there are doctors who would prefer to prescribe marijuana, can't, and yet can prescribe a form of heroin in terms of prescription painkillers is an abomination.
The contradictions that exist in pot law, specifically as it relates around medicinal marijuana, but then also as it relates to its overall damage compared to some of the other things and the sentencing disparities and everything else, it's time to fix a lot of those things. And I don't know how many states now have legalized medicinal marijuana. Illinois is one of the most recent. But that movement is really growing. Only 2 states now have just totally legalized it. You talk about economic development. In the 1800s, Missouri was one of the nation's top hemp producers. I don't know why this state and its strong agricultural heritage wouldn't say, hey, here's the movement. This stuff is going to be legal. We're all about freedom here in Missouri. Let's grab a hold of this stuff for our agricultural future.
Jane Duker, what are your thoughts on legalizing marijuana in the state of Missouri?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because when you were talking about the medicinal marijuana, when my dad, he had cancer, and because you aren't allowed to prescribe pot, they have pills with the chemical in it. They're not as effective.
THC pills.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and for the same reason, my dad couldn't eat, and the weight loss can be as dangerous during your treatment as anything else that can happen to you. And so I remember, him taking the pot pills, and let me just tell you, at that time, we would have tried anything and done anything to help him get better. And so,
or at least just to relieve his pain.
Absolutely. And so, the idea that a doctor can't do that and can't give the most effective chemical there is, is really sort of nonsense. And I think Tony does bring up a very good point when you talk about how the criminal justice system treats pot, and how that doesn't go without a lot of cost to society and the system when you're dealing with putting people in prison for life because they're a pot dealer, or we do need to rethink some of that. And I think some of that has gone on in the legislature, and John can talk about that. And there was, when I was in the governor's office, about really starting to reform sentencing laws to make them more reasonable with what we're really dealing with here. And I think we do need to have a frank discussion about this and take away all the the rhetoric and the garbage, and say, look, we need to look at a cost of benefit analysis. The criminal aspect, the medical aspect, the tax aspect. Somebody needs to take a real look at it so that we can stop, having, anecdotal conversations, and talk to law enforcement and talk to people who really are on the front lines, doctors and others, and say, we need to look at this because it's time.
All right. All of us do not answer to the voters. Our next panelist does answer the voters. John Deal, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Tony is right that there's a lot of kind of crossover on this. I mean, it's not necessarily a party line thing. In fact, we actually had a candidate last cycle who got through the whole primary system in an outstate race, and once it started, we found out he was a former treasurer of Show Me Cannabis.
Show Me Cannabis.
Yeah, running out there. So, honestly, it's not something I'll probably regret saying this now that I'm saying it.
But you have to now.
I don't.
Just let him say it.
Yeah. I don't hear a lot about this issue. I mean, it's just that other than on this show and on a few things, my office never gets contacted about it, and I don't hear a lot about it. I do think that probably some attitudes have changed on this over the last few years. I don't see the Missouri General Assembly legalizing it, and I disagree with Tony that if it gets on the ballot, it's going to pass in the state. I think it probably loses rather resoundingly. It's kind of like a little bit of the Obamacare voters that once they the younger people that probably are more inclined to support this are just less likely to vote, especially in an off year like a 2014. So it probably depends on what kind of ballot it gets on too. We are working on updating our criminal code. There's been over the past 2 or 3 years, and I don't know the specifics as it relates to this, but there's been a pretty thorough rewrite of our criminal code to modernize the statutes and to kind of right-size sentencing and what people are charged for one. It's been a 2-year process. We actually started bringing that to the floor last year to talk about, and I think it'll probably pass this year.
I had a elected official who I will not name names in this studio. If I mentioned his name, you would all know who he is. He said that he would be for legalizing marijuana the day 51% of his voters were for it. And so it's not just public opinion, it's who goes to the polls.
Yep.
And you can call up and make random phone calls, and great, they're all for legalizing marijuana, but until the people go to the polls who are voting for it, then and only then will it be legalized.
Well, and that's why I think if you actually got it on the ballot, this is where I disagree with John. I agree with him that it's not going to happen through the General Assembly. There are a lot of Democrats that won't even put their names on that vote. But I do believe if it goes to the ballot box, it actually does pass. And part of it is he's looking at the young voters. Look at the people that Jane was talking about and that you're talking about. People with actual experience with this issue from a medical standpoint are the elderly. And they have much more wide open views on this issue, at least as it relates to medicinal, than do a lot of people who just haven't had to deal with the cancer issue or something else. So I think there are a lot of voters out there that would actually vote for this if it was at the ballot box in districts all over the state.
And I think it depends on whether, too, it's a medicinal type of ballot measure, or whether it's just Colorado style, where I can walk into 7-Eleven and buy marijuana.
Well, but the fact is that the sad reality is that your children, anybody's children, it's easier to buy marijuana today than it is to get a 6-pack of beer. It's easier to buy marijuana than it is to go buy a pack of cigarettes. Why? Because marijuana is unregulated, and the kid who's in your health class or in your social studies class or your science class is selling you marijuana in your locker, and the 7-Eleven can't sell cigarettes in the school. So if you want to actually try and reduce marijuana use or make it harder for your kid to get it, it's counterintuitive, but we should legalize it and then regulate it like we do with alcohol and tobacco.
Well, and I think you need to look at the fact that, and I know St. Louis County's been doing some work on this, on the heroin epidemic in St. Louis County. Frankly, it's cheaper and easier to get heroin now than it is to get marijuana.
Well, now you're singing my song that you were yelling at me for a couple weeks ago.
No, I wasn't disagreeing with you then. I just think that there's a political reality here where people's opinions have to change, and the way that's going to happen is information. And I think that, but we have to start realistically talking about what's going on out there. And heroin's out there. And
you know what? In terms of don't tread on me, if I want to smoke a joint on a Saturday night in my house, why is the government telling me I can't do that? Who am I harming? If I'm allowed to get drunk in my house on a Saturday night, why can't I get high on a Saturday night at my house?
Imagine the export possibilities in those big Boeing planes that we're going to be building.
The China hub.
If we're growing the world's pot
right
here in Missouri. I mean, I tell you.
Some of the best farmland for it right here in Missouri. That's Tony Messenger, Jane Duker, John Deal. The board meeting continues next on the Big 550 KTRS. The board meeting in session with Tony Messenger, Jane Duker, John Deal. We're going to talk about some of the city development in a moment. But first, we have to just take a moment as a Big Ten grad, as a Nebraska grad, as somebody who has fought with Missouri Tigers both on the field and off the field. I don't know if I'm driving the Missouri Tigers bandwagon, but I'm sitting up real close behind the driver of this Missouri bandwagon. We don't know how good they are, and this season has been an absolute blast.
It's been fun. I'll tell you, I'll take it once. I'm a Mizzou grad, but I got to be there during the Woody Wagon era.
Right. We were in the same era. So it wasn't pretty.
It's a different wagon. It's just that one I think had square wheels on it, and it had a hard time getting momentum. No, it's really, who would have thought at the beginning of the season? I'd be curious to see what the Vegas odds were.
Right.
To see them winning the national championship. And they're really 2 factors away from playing in that game. Well, I guess maybe 3 factors. Maybe that Florida State guy gets charged today. And
We can only hope.
It drops out.
Yeah.
Well, let's not hope.
Wow.
Something
Yeah,
like
that was dark. Thanks for sharing.
But, I think Missouri's going to do very well on Saturday, and I think Michigan State can beat Ohio State. So we'll all be Michigan State fans Saturday night.
I think the move to the SEC, a lot of people thought, can Missouri step it up? But I was at Faurot Field in college where it was a Nebraska home game where it was all red. I mean, when they stormed the field Saturday night, it was just a whole lot of fun to watch.
Oh, it was. And if you look at it, too, why Missouri can compete. Missouri's a relatively big state within the SEC. You take out
right.
Florida, Georgia, Texas, but every place else. So we're a pretty good size. And we're really the only game in town in the state. There's no other major college football program in the state, unlike the other SEC states. So when we start closing the borders and getting the local players to stay here, I think they're going to be a power in that conference.
Well, and I think something that's very important as it relates to this year, we have a coach who has built a stable program over a period of years that can rebound from an off year that was based as much on injuries as anything else. And that makes a big difference. We have not been trading coaches every 2 or 3 or 4 years, and that's why they're being so successful over a long-term period under Gary Pinkel. And you talk about the SEC. It's not just the football team that all of a sudden is SEC. You got a volleyball team who's nationally ranked who could win a national championship. You got a wrestling program, a baseball team, a girls softball program, a basketball team that is at least getting into the tournament. Let's see if they can ever learn how to win in the first round. But I mean the programs.
Negative Nelly.
Debbie Downer over here.
And here's the great thing about the SEC
It's Medicaid's fault.
championship.
If we only expanded Medicaid,
Here's the other
would have
thing.
won in
And
the
here's
first
the
round.
key. Here is Gary Pinkel's key. And Jane Duker, you're not going to be able to deny this. The
Yes.
man rocks the sweater vest on the sideline.
Well, I know. That's his only downfall. I mean, the sweater vest. I mean, so, yeah. I mean, but he's also not like Mr. Emotive happy guy either. So I think that does have to do with the sweater vest.
All right. Moving on. The city of St. Louis has gotten some good news, Tony Messenger, over the last couple of days. Cortex seems to be rocking and rolling with this new IKEA. You have that Whole Foods development in the Central West End, which is a whole bunch of apartment complexes as well. City turning the tide? What's going on with the city?
Well, I mean, I think it has lots of different things that in various neighborhoods that are going well for it, but particularly that Central West End corridor, that Central Corridor, and Cortex and that area that is successful in part because of the healthcare complex that, by the way, would be doing a lot better if the legislature would pass a Medicaid expansion program.
There it is for you.
then that entire area could
But this is
continue
all
to
happening
boom
without Medicaid
because they won't
expansion.
be losing the jobs that they're losing right now. But no, there is a lot going on. I am not a hipster, so I've never actually been in an IKEA. I've been in a Whole Foods like maybe once. I don't eat arugula. I mean, so I'm not the target market apparently for these new stores.
Sweater vest.
But the people that follow me on Twitter that know about such things are incredibly excited about IKEA and Whole Foods because of the brand. And I actually talked to somebody the other day who said that as it relates to business development within Cortex, it matters that they have an IKEA because when they're talking to these high-tech businesses that are looking at St. Louis versus some other place, when they mention we've got an IKEA, it actually matters to them because they know their employees want an IKEA.
Well,
And what I find very interesting here is I just want to remind people that when I was in the governor's office, we actually worked on getting Cortex, and we did go through the Missouri Development Finance Board, and we did do incentives, and there were a lot of people who fought us on trying to revitalize that area. And what I think Cortex is a great example of is, one, we've stuck to it. It's been something that's been happening over 10 or 15 years. And these transformations don't happen on a dime. And they're well thought out, they're incremental, but they're focused. And so, I can proudly say that I was happy to work on getting Cortex and starting that in the beginning. And that was, many years ago, and look at what's happening. And so, so keep the eye on the ball. I know term limits makes that a little bit harder, but I like the fact that that has succeeded. And so I do think that doing the hipster thing, you want employees to come, you want young people to stay, you want a reason for them to be here, and those are the kind of things that do that. And so, I think that development area is probably the most stable, the most long term, and it has been. And like I said, it's been incremental, and to me means it's long term success. It's much higher percentage.
Hold on a second here.
So,
Holden is the reason Cortex is here. Did he also invent the internet too?
No, but I think it's fair to say that somebody had a
But he
vision.
can put together a piece of IKEA furniture in less
you
than
can't
20
give him any
minutes.
credit, can you?
I love Governor Holden.
Wow.
John Deal, last thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think a store like IKEA, I think is very positively symbolic, because a store like that doesn't choose to relocate without years and years, or to locate in a spot without years and years of market research.
Right.
And while land-based incentives may or may not be a part of their decision-making process, their bigger decision-making process is, what do the demographics look like, and can they get people in their store to buy the product? I think it's very positive for that area, especially coupled with the grocery store, the jobs. It's going to attract more people living there. I think,
Residential,
generally speaking, the younger professional these days like to live closer to where they work, and they want services that they're going to use around it. So I think there's a critical mass that's being built down there that's going to be very good.
That's John Deal, Tony Messenger, Jane Duker. We'll come back, wrap things up, and I got Cardinal tickets to give away. I got a 5-pack to give away. Stick around. We'll do it next on KTR. Saturday, don't forget Missouri basketball here Saturday morning early against UCLA, and then, of course, that big SEC championship game, the Tigers versus the Tigers. Mike Kelly on the call. We'll talk with him tomorrow about that. We're going to go around the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, what are your predictions? We'll start with John Deal.
Well, I think just like the past 2 weeks, Auburn gets a really cheap late touchdown, but they're already down by 18. So Missouri 35-24.
All right. Jane Duker.
I was going to go with 24-21. Our Tigers, the good Tigers.
All right. Tony Messenger.
Missouri Tigers win 38-17. They have at least one pick six, and Pinkel wears the sweater vest.
All right.
Nice.
I say
Not bedazzled.
I say 44-17 Mizzou, and that's from a Big Ten Nebraska grad. So I got your numbers down. We'll see how smart you guys really are.
Wow, right.
We have just enough time to tell you that we have a 5-pack to give away of the St. Louis Cardinals. Listen to this. The 5-pack consists of the Cubs, the Cubs, the Cubs, the Cubs, and the Cubs. That's right. It's the Cubs package. 5 games, all Cub games. We're going to give it to caller number 5, 969-KTRS, 1-888-550-KTRS, or star KTRS. Those are the phone numbers. Those on the board meeting are ineligible.
Oh.
You're killing me.
Wow.
You're killing me, McGraw.
We're giving away a package a day here on the Big 550 KTRS. It's the Cubs package today. Call number 5. 5 and 10 game Cardinal ticket packs go on sale tomorrow. Each pack includes 2014's top games and promotional giveaways. Get yours today at cardinals.com/holiday. Cardinal tickets, the Cubs package, caller number 5. Tony Messenger, thanks for coming in. Happy holidays to you. We'll see you next week.
Good to be here.
STLtoday.com. We can read him /opinion. John Deal headed back down to cut the deal with Boeing. John, thanks for checking in, and drive safe.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Jane Duker, back to your cubby hole. Former gadfly, former chief of staff, Jane Duker.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Tell your mom I said hi.
I will.
And we love those McBride homes.